Okay, so you want to understand how real estate actually makes money. Here's the version most people believe. You buy a house, you rent it out, the rent check shows up every month, and that's the profit. Simple. A property is basically a very expensive vending machine. You put money in once, and cash comes out every month after that. Most people who've never owned real estate think this is the entire story. And most people who have owned real estate for less than a year still think this is the entire story too. It sounds complete because rent is the part everyone can see. It's the number on the lease, the deposit that hits your account, the thing you'd point to if someone asked how a rental property makes money. And for a huge number of first-time landlords, rent really is the only number they ever track, which is exactly why so many of them end up disappointed, convinced real estate is overhyped, when the actual property was quietly making them money the entire time in ways they never bothered to look for. So naturally, you assume that if the rent barely covers the mortgage, the investment isn't really working. But here's what actually happens when you pull back the curtain on a rental property's real financial engine. Once you count every single way that property is building wealth simultaneously, not just the one that shows up as a deposit notification on your phone. By the end of this, you will know exactly how many separate ways a single property generates value at the same time, why a property that looks like it's barely breaking even on paper can still be making its owner extraordinarily wealthy, and why real estate has quietly outperformed a lot of flashier investments over long stretches of time precisely because of this stacking effect. People assume rental income is the return. It is not really. It's only one of at least four, sometimes five, separate financial engines running underneath a single property at the exact same time, and almost nobody explains this clearly to beginners before they buy their first deal. Think of a rental property less like a vending machine and more like a factory with four separate assembly lines running simultaneously: cash flow, loan paydown, appreciation, and leverage, each one quietly producing value whether or not you're paying attention to it. And a fifth line, tax benefits that most owners don't even discover until their accountant points it out. The first engine is cash flow, and it's the only one that most beginners actually track. This is simply what's left over every month after the property pays its own bills: the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and a reserve for maintenance and vacancy, subtracted from the rent it collects. If a property brings in $2,000 in rent and costs $1,700 a month to operate and finance, that $300 difference is cash flow, real money that lands in your bank account today. The only one of these four engines you can actually spend without selling or refinancing anything. The second engine is loan paydown, and this is the one that quietly builds enormous wealth while looking completely invisible on a bank statement. Every single month, part of your tenant's rent check is going toward paying down the principal balance on your mortgage. You didn't write that check, your tenant did. On a typical 30-year mortgage, the amount going toward principal starts small and grows every year, meaning by year 10 or 15, a meaningful chunk of every rent payment is directly increasing your ownership stake in the property. Dollar for dollar, funded entirely by someone else's rent money. Over the life of a loan, this can easily add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth transferred from a tenant's monthly payment straight into an owner's equity without the owner ever noticing it happening in real time. The third engine is appreciation, the property simply becoming worth more over time. Real estate values don't move in a straight line. Some years are flat, some years even decline. But across long stretches of history, home values in the United States have climbed at a national average pace somewhere in the 3 to 5% range annually. On a $400,000 property, even a modest 4% annual appreciation adds $16,000 of value in a single year. Money the owner didn't lift a finger for, that simply accumulated because they kept holding an asset that tends to rise in value over time in a growing economy. The fourth engine, and the one that changes the entire math of the previous three, is leverage, using borrowed money to control an asset far larger than your own cash could buy outright. This is the single most misunderstood force in real estate investing. If you buy a $400,000 property with a 20% down payment, that's $80,000 of your own money. If that property appreciates 4% in a year, you didn't earn 4% on your money, you earned closer to 20%, because the $16,000 gain in value is measured against your $80,000 investment, not against the full purchase price. This is exactly why real estate investors talk about leverage the way they do. It's one of the only ways an ordinary person can legally borrow 80% of an asset's value from a bank at a fixed interest rate for 30 years and keep 100% of any gain in that asset's value for themselves. There's a fifth engine that operates quietly in the background every single year: depreciation, a tax benefit that lets property owners write off a portion of the building's value annually, even while the property is likely increasing in real-world value at the exact same time. Think of it as the government allowing you to claim the house is technically wearing out on paper, sheltering a meaningful portion of your rental income from taxes, even though nothing about the actual physical building has changed, and the market value might be climbing the entire time. This is one of the quiet reasons wealthy investors keep gravitating toward real estate specifically. The tax code itself is working in the owner's favor in ways that simply don't exist for most other types of investments. Here's why understanding all 5 of these matters so much, and it's the exact mistake that causes so many new investors to misjudge whether a deal is actually good or bad. A property that generates only $100 a month in pure cash flow can look mediocre, almost not worth the hassle, if you're only looking at that one number. But add in $5,200 of loan paydown for the year, $16,000 of appreciation at a typical rate, and several $1,000s of tax savings from depreciation. And that same mediocre $100 a month property might actually be generating a total return of 25 to 30% a year on the actual cash invested once every engine is counted, not just the one that shows up as a bank deposit. This stacking effect is also exactly why real estate behaves so differently from most other investments people compare it to. When someone buys a stock, they're generally only getting 1 or 2 of these engines: dividend income if the company pays one, and price appreciation if the company grows. There's no tenant quietly paying down a loan on your behalf. There's no meaningful leverage available to an ordinary retail investor the way there is with a mortgage. And the tax treatment doesn't offer anything close to the sheltering power of real estate depreciation. This doesn't make stocks a bad investment. It simply means real estate is doing something structurally different, stacking multiple separate wealth-building mechanisms on top of each other inside a single asset, financed largely with someone else's money. It's also worth understanding why these 5 engines interact instead of simply adding up in a vacuum. Appreciation increases the value of the exact same equity that loan paydown is simultaneously building, which means your ownership stake is growing from 2 directions at once: a shrinking loan balance and a rising property value, both increasing the gap between what you owe and what the property is worth. Leverage then multiplies whatever appreciation happens on top of that gap, and depreciation reduces the tax bill on the cash flow and eventual profit generated by the whole structure. None of these 4 engines exist independently of the others. They're all compounding against the same underlying asset at the same time, which is exactly why real estate returns can look unremarkable in any single year, and genuinely remarkable once measured honestly over 5, 10, or 20 years. None of this means leverage is a one-way bet, and skipping this part would leave out the exact mechanism that has wiped out plenty of investors who understood only half the picture. Leverage multiplies losses with the same force it multiplies gains. If that same $400,000 property drops 4% in value instead of rising, the owner with $80,000 down doesn't lose 4%. They lose roughly 20% of their actual invested capital, because the loss is measured against the smaller number they actually put in, not the full purchase price. This is exactly what happened to a large number of over-leveraged investors during the housing downturn of the late 2000s. Properties bought with very little money down that only needed a modest decline in value to wipe out the owner's entire equity, sometimes leaving them owing more on the loan than the property was worth. The same multiplier that makes real estate such a powerful wealth builder on the way up is precisely what makes it dangerous in the hands of an investor who overextends, skips the maintenance reserve, or buys at the very top of an overheated market with barely any cushion. Now let's put real numbers next to 2 very different outcomes over a 10-year holding period. In the good scenario, an investor buys a $300,000 rental property with $60,000 down and holds it for a full decade. Modest cash flow of around $200 a month adds up to $24,000 over 10 years. Loan paydown on a typical mortgage schedule adds roughly $45,000 of equity. Appreciation at a conservative 4% annual average brings the property's value to around $440,000, a gain of $140,000. Add in a reasonable estimate of accumulated tax savings from depreciation, and the investor's original $60,000 investment has effectively grown into well over $200,000 of total wealth, a return that would be considered exceptional in almost any other asset class, achieved on a property that, viewed through cash flow alone, might have looked barely worth owning in any single individual year. In the realistic, harder scenario, an investor buys a similar property but in a slower growth market, experiences a costly repair in year 3 that wipes out 2 years of cash flow, and sells after only 5 years due to a personal financial need. Appreciation over that shorter window is more modest. Loan paydown has had less time to compound, and after selling costs, the total return looks far less impressive, sometimes barely beating a basic index fund. The property itself, the engines, the mechanics were identical to the good scenario. What changed was time, holding period, and the ability to weather a bad year without being forced to sell. The zoom out truth about how real estate actually makes money is this: rent is the least important of the five engines, even though it's the one everyone stares at. The real wealth in real estate comes from patiently letting leverage, loan paydown, appreciation, and tax benefits compound quietly in the background over years, while cash flow simply covers the bills along the way and occasionally puts a little extra in your pocket. Investors who only judge a deal by its monthly cash flow are reading one gauge on a 5-gauge dashboard, and it's usually the smallest one. Understanding these five engines is one thing. Actually, financing the asset that makes all of them possible is a completely different puzzle, one most first-time buyers walk into with almost no idea how a lender actually decides what to approve, what rate to offer, or what that 30-year loan is genuinely costing them behind the scenes. That's exactly where we're headed next, into the economics of how mortgages actually work.